So the argument is that the self develops from the outside in. All right, when you get born, you don't even know that you're here, but you know that other people are here. All right, therefore, you come to know yourself in part as a reflection of the way that other people know you. By the time you know who you are, unbeknownst to you, a large chunk of your identity has been unconsciously assimilated from your social surroundings. All right, English translation. Let's take your name. Who's got a name? Or to ask the question another way, who doesn't have a name? Anybody doesn't have a name? Okay, good. We all have names. And in fact, not only do we all have names, but there's a whole psychology associated with names. If you take psychology in college, you'll read about something called the cocktail party phenomenon. Who's ever been in a crowded room with a whole lot of people talking and you can't hear anything because everyone's like gibber, 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 gibber. All right, but then all of a sudden on the other side of the room, somebody says your name. And like an auditory thunderbolt, you hear that fine, and you kind of slither over like a reptile to hear what they're saying about you. All right, who's courageous enough to admit that that's what's happened? All right, good. You're an honest lot, and I admire that. All right, so what's the point? Well, the point is, if you think about it for a moment, your name seems to be such an intimate part of you that it's tempting to think that it has something innately to do with you. But is there anybody here that picked your own name? Right? Your name has nothing to do with you. In fact, some people do after you get rid of your old one, but no one picks our name at first. It has nothing whatsoever to do with you. It's an arbitrary, symbolic, linguistic affectation foisted upon you by your malicious parents so they can have something to refer to you by. Right? It has nothing to do with you whatsoever. If what I've said is even remotely correct, that the self develops from the outside in, does it make sense that you'd be a radically different individual if you happen to have been reared and gestated in a different time and place? Right? Does that seem even remotely reasonable? So the idea here is that if part of yourself is determined by your social surroundings, then who you are is in part both culturally as well as historically determined. Self-esteem, if we had more time, I would try to convince you is one of the most important psychological attributes that you could have at your disposal. Right, for any number of reasons. Very obviously, common sense masquerading as psychological insight. People that feel good about themselves are happier than people who don't. Anyone take issue with that? It's like, duh, right? Miserable people are not as happy people, right? So that should be fairly obvious. Not so obvious, perhaps, is that people with low self-esteem, people who don't feel that good about themselves, turn out to have a host of physical problems. They also engage in disruptive social behaviors at times. So self-esteem turns out to be very, very important. And what I'd like to do for the time that we have left together today is to just talk a bit about how self-esteem is acquired at different points in your life, given what we've just said, that the self develops from the outside in. One thing that we need to do in order, psychologically speaking, to be able to function is to believe that life has meaning. How's that sound? Sound okay? All right, but that's necessary but not sufficient, according to Becker. So he says culture lends meaning, but it also confers significance. Right? In order to really be able to get up each day, not only do we need to believe that the world around us has meaning, we need to also believe that we as individuals serve some valuable or significant function in the context of the meaningful universe to which we subscribe. All right, how does culture pull that off? Well, it pulls that off by giving us social roles with associated standards of conduct, the satisfaction of which allows you to perceive yourself as a person of value in a world of meaning. All right, lame question. Who's ever done something where you're like, I was pretty cool, I feel pretty good? Anybody ever have a good day? Good, I hope so. Because what Becker argues is that's not any kind of pathological conceit. That's the normal yearning of the human animal. We all want to feel like we bring something to the cosmic table. All right, well, what Becker does is, what he says is, when you are lucky enough to perceive yourself as a person of value in a world of meaning, that's what self-esteem is. So remember when we first started this tirade, I said that one of the things I wanted to do was to give you a definition of what self-esteem is. Well, according to Ernest Becker at least, self-esteem is the belief that you're a person of value in a world of meaning. What's the function of self-esteem? Well, according to this analysis at least, the primary function of self-esteem is a defensive, and I don't mean that word in any pejorative sense, it's a defensive one, and that's to minimize the anxiety that the awareness of death might otherwise produce. All right, well, so what? All right, two things to think about. Idea number one is that according to this analysis, the need for self-esteem is universal. All people in all places need to feel good about themselves. But thing number two, and I find this personally quite disarming, is that on the one hand, everybody needs self-esteem. On the other hand, you don't get self-esteem directly for yourself, by yourself. Because self-esteem is ultimately acquired by adhering to the standards of value that are intrinsic to the social role that you inhabit in the context of the worldview that you subscribe to. English translation, we get self-esteem from the outside of ourselves, depending on social dictates which vary considerably over time and place. All right, Erik Erikson, he said, you know what? Every one of us at some point in our lives has what he called an identity crisis, whether we're aware of it or not. And when we have this identity crisis, we get to make a choice. And some of us choose not to choose, but that's our choice. And what Erikson said is, you know what? There's two directions that you could go in. One direction is understandable, but tremendously unfortunate. And that's to spend the rest of your life doing what you've been doing so far, and that's to measure yourself in terms of someone else's expectations of you. And on the other hand, what Erikson says is it doesn't have to end that way, that you could use your rapidly developing cognitive skills, your emotional skills, your intuitive skills to make conscious decisions about the kind of person that you would like to be, and then to behave in accordance with your own standards of what it means to be a valuable individual. In other words, what Erikson is saying is that there's two possible directions. One is to continue acquiring self-esteem by adhering to someone else's standards. The other is to, in the words of a guy that I'm really fond of, Henry Miller, the other is to make of yourself a work of art, to literally spend your life participating in the ultimate human prerogative, and that's to contribute to the nature of your own self-development. All right, and I like the way that Erikson frames that possible distinction. I also like when Erikson says, in our culture, all of the action, psychodynamically speaking, is right around now. Who's heading to college either after this year or the next? The reason Erikson said this is such a volatile as well as promising time is that in America, when you leave, when you're about to go to college, or when you do go to college, that's the first time you put enough distance, psychological and sometimes physical, between you and the others around you in order to differentiate between who you are and who someone else wants you to be.